Ladies and gentlemen and organizers, first I want to thank the organizers for inviting me here. Referring to the morning session, I feel extremely happy to have the opportunity to speak in front of an audience from one of the educational superpowers, Korea. I've been asked to speak about the future of universities. Universities work in different contexts, and universities are extremely creative. So whatever you offer, solution you offer as new, somebody has already invented it. And what is new and path-breaking in one country can be a standard solution in another one. So even though we try to have, and I try to have a global perspective, our outlook is to some extent always determined by our own background. So therefore I just wanted to say that mine, of course, is the Nordic one, which is, I think, in a way, a rather interesting combination of the elitism of high-level research and equality. As to elitism, as you see here, there are 7 Nordic universities on the Shanghai list among the 100 top universities in the world. So it's only US and UK that have more on the list than the Nordic ones. But at the same time, we are quite equal. There are small variations in employability between universities, between alumni of different universities in the Nordic countries. There is a relatively equal recruitment to universities. And there is the tuition-free education that makes it possible for most citizens to go to university. So with this background, I go to the 4th industrial revolution, which is of course a challenge for all, which both the 3rd and the 4th, in fact, revolutions have a deep impact on our lives and future. We know that the music business has been forced to adapt in a profound way. Traditional media struggle to survive. Well-branded department stores have difficulty in coping with net-based distribution channels. And this is just a few examples. The interesting issue is about universities. Are we prepared for this? We increasingly face the same pressures in the university sector. And in order to survive, universities do have to understand and adapt to the profound changes which we see. Personally, I have no doubt about their ability to do so. Universities have existed for 1,000 years and adapted to very many changes in society, so we will be able to adapt to these changes as well. But at the same time, I should say that I'm convinced that in 10 years, universities will look very, very radically different from the present ones, but I'm not completely certain in what ways. And I'm speaking only about the educational challenges posed by digitalization, globalization, and the 4th industrial revolution. Of course, in the research sector, we find similar challenges with open science, big data, and similar catchwords showing that research is equally much affected. But I will be speaking about education only. And of course, all revolutions have their victims. Doomsayers have told us that universities might be found among those, like just I mentioned here, one citation, if universities fail to rethink their strategic situations and business models, they may well fall to the common educational tsunami. And I could put up 100 similar citations from various sources. And the MOOCs and the massive online open courses was the first warning signal. I've seen Wonderland, said Sebastian Thrun already several years ago. So why would one bother to study at a local university when you can get a MOOC from one of the leading universities in the world? In other words, in the same way as e-commerce challenges department stores and Netflix challenges the film and broadcasting industry, we might expect similar challenges in the university sector as well. And these challenges are of three kinds. First, as I already mentioned, of course, the business model, or the model for the economical model for universities to function on. And here we have, of course, very many differences throughout the world. Secondly, pedagogical approach of universities is and has to be quite radically changed. And of course, then we face, thirdly, the usefulness of the product, the output that we achieve, the education that is given, which has been discussed very much here previously and certainly is the main theme of this conference. So a few words about these challenges. As to the business model, some expect the advent of low-touch universities which offer low-fee competition with the traditional high-touch, expensive universities, just like Ryanair in the air. There we have examples of this already. The most radical competition models, which are already in operation, include the professorless university, administered only by low-paid course mentors, or the university-less community of academics earning the tuition fees themselves. However, I won't go into detail in this respect. The concern about budget competitors is obviously more acute in high-fee education societies than, for instance, in our society, which is tuition-free, where the commercial logic is lacking. But we, of course, on the other hand, face other challenges of similar kind, are faced with challenges related to public support, making the brands of universities, the social responsibility of universities, much more important also for their earning models. Secondly, we need a new pedagogics. The advent of the touchpad generation to the universities clearly challenges traditional ways of teaching and learning. For a person used to navigating on a touchpad already before being able to read, and they do, and consulting Google and Wikipedia and all other sources whenever new information is needed, a pedagogics that still to a considerable extent is based on the idea of transferring existing knowledge and information, is not appealing. And this was discussed extensively also this morning, that this kind of transfer of knowledge model is outdated for many reasons. For the new generation also, concepts such as time and place have a very different meaning and are much less important than for older generation. And this puts additional pressure on universities in making their competitive strategies. The universities have to be able to cope with this. According to international surveys, students do experience this need as well. They demand a full use of virtually available content, full use of social media, much more flexibility and less constraints related to time, cooperation, the possibility to learn real cooperative skills, working together, similar skills. Of course, in the global world, multilingualism and internationality, and last but not least, labor market relevance, in other words, the usefulness of the teaching and the exams. And that leads us to the third challenge, the usefulness of the product we offer. And I should say that even in the world of digitalization, there is still some value in locality, and in fact a growing value of locality. And the universities have to be able to demonstrate their strengths in this respect, relating to the fact that universities are places where different generations meet, the experienced researchers meet the young and brave new minds of each new generation of students. These are places where you really can perform the unity of research and teaching in the true Humboldtian sense. So to combine this knowledge, what is essential is for universities is to show that they can still produce surplus value for those coming to universities, which means, of course, as I mentioned already, first, that all virtually available educational content must be taken into account and used in active manner, open access to publications, data, educational materials, pedagogics that builds on blended learning and similar approaches is, of course, a central thing. The goal is not so much to the transfer of information and knowledge, but to learn the capacity to find, process and create new knowledge. The goal has to be to intertwine research and teaching, take the Humboldtian ethos seriously in the way that each student also is directly connected with the top-level research at the university. In addition, of course, you have to acknowledge that the brands of the universities are much more important, and the brands do contain more than just pedagogics and the research done at the university. It focuses very much on the interaction on university campus, the networks you build with the teachers, with your student fellows on the campuses, and so on. That's all things which you get at a university, and which become obviously much more important many times than the actual content of education. As the virtual world redefines our relations to time and place, this also must change the modus operandi of universities. We have to cope with continuous tensions between timeliness and timelessness in a flexibility. We need a new flexibility in a radical way. The flexibility has been said to be an essential part of a modern higher education system. I will return to this at the end. So what we need is to be able to give a product that essentially is an education for an uncertain future, where the jobs will be changed in a very radical way, as we heard already this morning, where the most important things are things like giving analytical and critical skills to students. And if I speak to people hiring students from large firms, their answer is often, well, it's good that they have an academic degree. We don't care so much if it's in history or philosophy or mathematics, as long as it shows that they have a good analytical and critical skill. Those are, these are good persons. So these skills are often much more important than the content, which is only a means to deliver these skills. Of course, research skills in the Humboldtian connection between research and teaching, these skills become important. Creativity, that's really the buzzword of today, but that's something where the universities can be much more advanced than today. Learning skills, and finally, as I mentioned many times before, flexibility. We need a new and radical type of flexibility within the universities, giving the students possibility to creatively and in their own way build their exams and build their future. So you could also say that flexibility contains a demand for putting down the silos, for which University, I must admit, universities are very well known to be very efficient in building silos, but both between themselves, between the universities and the societies, and within themselves, between disciplines, faculties, departments, whatever. They are very experienced and silo builders. But we have to bring them down. The university must be able to and willing to break many boundaries. A university that wants to be successful in a world of quite fluid conceptions of time and place, with a multitude of opportunities for the young and talented, has to be brave enough to break the boundaries of disciplines, educating real problem solvers who can contribute to the solving of societal challenges, the grand societal challenges across the board of disciplines. But we also have to be able to work more closely than before, together with schools, other institutions of secondary education, to provide new and flexible learning paths. For those very talented, perhaps already at school, you can do the university education and vice versa. We have to be able to interact very closely with societal institutions and the labor market, accepting a flexible oscillation between work and study. And this was touched upon this morning as well, that we cannot anymore see education as one separate part of our lives. This is something which we have to return to continuously, and that presupposes a much more radical cooperation between the labor market and the universities. And we have to accept the relativization of locality and temporality by including the virtual and the global in the local. So, as I see it, a university that breaks such kinds of boundaries is a university that is deeply connected to society, both locally and globally. Such a university is a university that fulfills its task in the best possible way. Well, I thank you for listening. I hope to welcome you all in Helsinki in due course. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me. It's a very prestigious conference. I thought what I would do is briefly give you, for a minute or two, an overview of Northwestern University, and then talk a little bit as an economist, not as my day job as a university president, but as an economist who works on labor economics, talk a little bit about how an economist would evaluate the success or the failures of a higher education industry, whether it's in Germany or Finland or the United States. But then mainly I want to get back to, again, speaking as a labor economist, what do I think the fourth industrial revolution is going to mean for labor markets across the world, and very importantly, how should higher education institutions react to those changes? So very quickly, Northwestern's located, we have 3 campuses, a small one in the Middle East, where we do global media, mainly as a partner with Al Jazeera, very important news outlet for the 1.7 billion Muslims throughout the world. We have our hospitals and our medical school and our law school 12 miles away from our Evanston campus in Chicago. And it's a university that has a number, as any university does, as you'll see, research centers. And getting back to Thomas's point, they are increasingly interdisciplinary. So when we have an environmental studies center, just as I'm sure you have at Helsinki, economists are there, biologists are there, journalists are there, lawyers are there, other scientists, engineers are there. And we find that, of course, is the way you do research is very different than when I first began my academic career on the faculty at University of Pennsylvania way back in 1979. Then we were much more siloed, and as was pointed out, if you're going to get serious research support, in our case mainly from the National Institutes of Health in the United States, it better be interdisciplinary. So whether it's nanotechnology, or as I said, the environment, or any other research center in increasingly astrophysics and the like, it's increasingly interdisciplinary. The main revenue source we have, and I don't know what it's like in Germany or in Finland, but our operating budget is $2.4 billion a year US, which makes us a fairly small to mid-size private research university. If you look at Harvard, you look at University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, those budgets are twice ours. But the single major contributor to that is sponsored research. It's our laboratories. And when I talk to our undergrads and our graduate students and our professional school students, they readily think that the funding in the university is all about them. But as you see, $677 million, you do the math, that's 28% of our budget is to keep our research labs open. And that's the one thing that even sometimes faculty and alumni don't understand, that we're major contributors to research output. We have 12 schools, very quickly. Maybe the best known is one of the places I'm honored to teach, the Kellogg School of Management, which is a business school. We also have the Medill School of Journalism. That's pretty well known, and a number of other schools as well. We attract students from all over the world. Turns out that 23% of our students are from outside the US. Undergrads, it's about 11%, which is very similar to the Ivy university average, and about a third of all of our graduate and professional school students come from outside the United States. Not surprising, you'll see that half of those students come from China. We're proud to say that about 10% come from South Korea as well. We also, just like any university, have a number of outreaches to the great universities here in South Korea in business and engineering and law and the like. So now that's enough with my little talking about Northwestern. Now I want to put on my hat, not as the president of Northwestern, but as an economist who studies higher education throughout the world. There are a lot of ways we make our case when we're talking to politicians and we're talking to other people who can control our future. We're quick to talk about the accumulation of human capital through education. We're quick, as I just pointed out, with our 28% of our budget to keep our labs open. We talk about research output. One thing that's often lost, and I don't know what the percentages are in Germany or in Finland or in South Korea, but at least in the US, there are 4,600 colleges and universities enrolling 20 million people. And if you add up all our budgets, I mentioned before that annual budget for Northwestern is almost $2.5 billion US. The total budgets for all those colleges and universities is $600 billion. That's 3% of all economic output in the United States. And when I talk to people in Washington, D.C. about the value of U.S. higher education, I always make that point as well, that we're one of the largest, not only one of the most important industries, but one of the largest ones as well. And I think that's an interesting fact to try to figure out for all the different countries, especially in South Korea. If you look nationally at all of those universities, as I mentioned, 20 million students studying in the United States today, 5% of them, or 1 million, come from outside the United States. We heard from this morning a wonderful, inspiring talk from the former Prime Minister of Australia when she mentioned that Australia is a major net exporter of educational services, bringing many more international students to Australia compared to the Australians that study abroad. That's nothing compared to the United States. When you actually look at the numbers, it's one of the few things we have left in the US that we're in fact a net exporter, and we're the world's largest net exporter of educational services. It's not surprising. Thomas gave you a slide from the Shanghai rankings, and he pointed out that 50 of the highest rated 100 universities in the world are located in the United States. If you look at the top 50, once again, Thomas, is 25. So it's not surprising that students from all over the world not only are eager to go to Germany and to Finland, but to the United States as well. Now this slide is an important slide for any economist, and I don't know whether in Germany and in Finland and in South Korea you are increasingly asked to explain whether your colleges and universities are engines of income and wealth mobility or not. I think most people are aware, certainly a lot of economists have been very clear about this, that since 1979 in the United States and in Western Europe, the movement towards increased income and wealth mobility stopped. Nobody expected it to stop. If you look at the US, and I've done a lot of work on this myself, from 1900 to 1979, income mobility went up, wealth mobility went up, and as a consequence, the degree of inequality in distribution of wealth and income really went down. The world changed in 1979. In 1979, there was an intense increase in income and wealth inequality. So in the United States, I'm constantly asked as an economist, much less as a president, what do those universities do to ensure mobility? If you enroll a student from a relatively disadvantaged background, what's the probability that that student will end up near the top of the income distribution? There's a brilliant economist named Raj Chetty from Stanford who did some fantastic work, and this summarizes some of it. He asked the following question, and I would love to have the comparable data for Germany, Finland, South Korea, and the rest of the world. He asked the following question. If you were born in 1980, what's the probability, and you grew up in the bottom 20% of American income distribution, that's income below, in today's dollars, $21,000. So you grew up among the bottom 20% of American households. What's the probability that when you reach age 32 in 2012, you're going to be not in the bottom 20%, but the top 20%? That top cutoff is 104,000. So again, this is a really important question I think everyone should ask, especially everyone involved in higher education. If you grow up in the bottom fifth, what's the probability that you're going to end up in the top fifth when you're in your early to mid 30s? It turns out that number for the United States is really very low. You only have an 8% chance, okay? 8% chance, fewer than 1 out of 10, to grow up in the bottom and end up in the top. However, if you have a higher education degree, that probability is 21%. If that degree, so rather than 8%, it's 21. What if that degree is from one of the great public institutions, the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, the University of Wisconsin, Madison, one of the University of California schools, one of University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, then it turns out the probability of going from the bottom to the top over that part of your lifetime is 42%. And then finally, the most amazing and gratifying statistic is what if you go to one of the Ivies? What if you go to Georgetown? What if you go to Duke? What if you go to Stanford? What if you go to University of Chicago? What if you go to Northwestern? And that's the number there. You have a 52% chance, if you're lucky enough to enroll in one of those schools, to go from the bottom fifth to the top fifth. Now, is that going to continue over time? It really depends on what the fourth industrial revolution does to labor markets. And it turns out that there are two of my colleagues, they happen to be with me in the economics department of Northwestern, who are the leading debaters on the future of what the fourth industrial revolution is going to do to income mobility, to economic growth, to labor force changes, and to what higher education universities need to adapt. On the left is Bob Gordon. Robert Gordon wrote a book, and I'll show you the book right here. It's called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. It's a best-selling book, and he argues that the historical growth rates in the American economy, which were 2% a year adjusted for inflation, and that's the growth rate from 1870 in the US to 2007, that 2% growth, and if you know the rule of 72, the rule for compound interest, that means the economy doubled every 35 years. He now says that the average growth rate adjusted for inflation going forward is going to be less than 1%. So rather than the economy growing every 35 years, it's going to grow in 75 to, actually, if it's 0.8 growth rate, it's 90 years. On the other hand, on the other side, and we go back to that, from that thing, is Joel Mokyr. And Joel Mokyr has a very different view. He looks at technology and he says, technology creates jobs. It creates economic growth. And in fact, his estimate of the future of the economy is very, very positive. So I don't know who's going to be right. The Australian Prime Minister asked that question. She said, this technological change, it leads to automation. What's going to be the future of jobs? And very importantly, what's going to be the future of higher education institutions that prepare people for those jobs? So nobody knows for sure. As an economist, I was intrigued at the beginning of the conference this morning when the host said that the weather today was clear and it's beautiful and clear, and that's going to be what you come out of this conference with, a beautiful and clear path for the future. But the reality is it's very, very difficult to tell, again, whether technology is going to be labor enhancing or whether it's not. So as an economist, I've thought a lot about this, and for my last 6 minutes, I want to talk specifically about what I have found in my new book that also recently came out and other people's work. And it specifically is about the fourth industrial revolution. And there you have some lines from the head of the World Economic Forum. In the future, talent more than capital will represent the critical factor of production. And then he lists a whole range of things, not different than some things Thomas mentioned and other speakers this morning: robotics, nanotechnology. I mentioned quantum computing and the like. And what does that mean for higher education? Nobody knows for sure. Here's some speculation consistent with what Thomas said. Maybe a decrease in international student mobility, probably, as he said, a decrease in human instructors, probably an increase in interdisciplinary teaching, in digital platforms, and access to digital education. In conclusion, I have 5 things about the future, and I once wrote a book about why it's so hard to predict the future. We heard from the Prime Minister about one futurist who got it right. I argue in that book that if enough people make predictions, somebody's going to get it right. It doesn't necessarily mean they have an inherent model for how the economy works or the transitions based to labor force based on technology. If you predict enough things, one of them is going to come right. So I don't know for sure about that. But here are my 5 things. I don't have a slide about it. These are my 5 most likely predictions as a labor economist with expertise in American higher education. And the first one, again, is Thomas's, that whatever happens in terms of robotics and the like, interdisciplinary research and teaching are going to become more important than ever. And if you have those silos, and I love that picture looking from Iowa or Nebraska of those silos, that's the old model. And if you don't break down those silos, you're not preparing students for the world in which we're going to send them. That's number 1. Number 2, creativity is at a premium, and several people mentioned that. We just had the reaccreditation team for our engineering school at Northwestern. Our approach to engineering, which might be different than some approaches in Korea and elsewhere, is really design engineering. It's much less on the technical skills, and it's much more on creating creative people who are entrepreneurs. And I think that's my second point. Creativity is at a premium. If you're thinking about worrying about going into a profession that could be outsourced to Hyderabad or somewhere else, or somewhere in China, creativity cannot be outsourced. And I think it's more important, the burden is on higher education institutions to make sure that we don't just teach narrow technical skills, but we teach creativity. The third thing is cultural literacy, another thing you touched on, Thomas. I teach econ math. I get a lot of Asian Americans and a lot of international students because they go there and they come to Northwestern and they're very interested because I'm an econometrician. They want to learn those skills. And I can tell you that every week somebody comes to my office and they say, President Shapiro, Professor Shapiro, give me another course I should take. What's another math course? What's another statistics course? What's another econometrics course I should take? And I say, where do you want to work? And you know what they say? I want to work in South Korea. I want to work in India. I want to work in Vietnam. I want to work in Indonesia. I want to work in China. And you know what I tell them? Stop taking so much economics, so much statistics, and so much math. What you should take, if you're interested in South Korea, take a course in Korean history, Korean politics, Korean religion, Korean literature, God forbid, Korean language, Korean art, Korean music. That's the cultural literacy that pays off now in the fourth industrial revolution. Number 4, I used to say when I first became a professor in 1979 that if I get it right, I'm going to train my students to work in a certain job category in a certain industry and realize that that student is probably going to change jobs 3 or 4 times throughout that person's career. That's not the case now. We're not training people to change jobs within a profession. We're training people for multiple professions. So my students come up to me and they say, I'm going to start off in teaching. I'm going to do Teach for America. And then I'm going to law school. Oh, you want to be a lawyer? No, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be a business person. So if you think about the skills somebody needs for teaching, for law, for business, and on and on and on, those are very different skills than one would expect with the narrow technical training that I got when I was in college in the early to mid 1970s. Fifth thing, and my final point, and I still have 38 seconds right on time, is exactly one thing that Thomas said. You know, people ask me all the time as a university president, what's the greatest outcome you want for your postdocs, for your professional school students, for your PhD and master's students, and most importantly, perhaps, for your undergrads? Is it, you know, being able to tell the difference between alternative facts and real facts? Is it to be quantitatively adept? Is it to have aesthetic appreciation? And I say no. The most important thing we want from our students, because this is what you need with a changing, enhanced technological world, is 1, the ability to educate yourself for a lifetime, which is exactly what Thomas said. When I graduated college, and even when I got my PhD, I knew so much less about the world than I do now. And you want to make sure that the students have that nimbleness, they have that flexibility, they have the skills to educate themselves for a lifetime. The most important thing, though, isn't to have those skills, it's to have the humility to know that you're only beginning your education when you graduate university. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to round up this section by giving the perspective of a director of an institute and a teacher, how we can contribute to the challenges of the digitalization of our society. Now coming to my talk. Of course, it's all about cooperation, but of course, digitalization in means of production in Germany is called Industry 4.0. This brings me to the number 4, which is also the logo of our institute. And here, of course, I have a short reflection on the university strategy. The university strategy is quite similar as what Mr. Williamson said, what he is wishing himself for the university. Me, as an institute director, I'm also wishing to be independent. So the university is just setting the framework in which we can grow. And this leads to, especially in Aachen, to the fact that we have numerous industry-oriented mid- and large-scale institute, by doing this, we improve our educational situation. The 4 I's stand for interdisciplinary, integrating those interdisciplinary to become a solution. This solution has to be industry-oriented in means of engineering. And of course, it's also my truest belief today, it has to be international. I give you one example for each slide. First of all, interdisciplinary. Before I sing the loud song for interdisciplinary, I must say the core tone of interdisciplinary is being strong in your discipline. So all our 400 employees work on textiles, covering the entire value chain from making fibers to end products, but doing textiles. But their discipline, which they take in their in their brain, in their head, is something else. Only 25% are mechanical engineering majoring, which have a major in textiles. The other are engineers having a major in any kind of engineering. And I will give later some examples for it. Or applied natural sciences. We even have people from humanities, ecologists in our team, because this is needed at the end to get integrated solutions, but not, let me just point it out, we are still our institute is focused on our core technology. But with those people, with the different disciplines, then we can cooperate. We can cooperate with other institutes which are as good in their field as we are in our field. So excellence in your basic knowledge is the prerequisite for being interdisciplinary. And I don't go through this, and by doing so, by working with other institutions which are leading in automotive research, in medical research, and so on, by partnering, and it's again cooperation, we are even better than just doing it ourselves. Just one example might be said, the STC, this is a Smart Textronics Center. This is a joint lab dedicated to digitalization, digital products, so electronics in textiles, apparel, composites, and whatever. And this is our Korean branch office. I come to that later. The other thing is you have to give the students and also the researchers, because the most researchers leave after their PhD or their postdoc phase, the chance to cooperate with industry. And the traditional way is that we travel to our industry and then go back and do research at home. The next generation is what we have here. This is the largest technology campus, a 4 billion investment, the largest technology campus in Europe, where companies are doing their research jointly with us. So this is the next step of technology transfer, not to do it as a partner, but do it really as a team. Also, I will give an example for that later. Internationalization, of course, we have this numerous cooperation agreements, and all of our students go at least abroad. But at the end of the day, the students come back, and then, of course, you can also grow as an institution. So we have today 4 non-Aachen locations. One is in Netherlands, one is in Turkey, one is in Ansan in Korea, in the Gwanggi-do Technopark, and one is in Augsburg, which is Bavaria, but it's also a different culture, I must say. So now, after this commercial break for the Institute, what is actually the structure which we provide to order to educate our students and researchers? I come to this very important topic of digitalization. And of course, in Germany, we are to some extent the forerunner. Industry 4.0 is the code word in Germany. Of course, in Korea, you say smart factories. In other countries, you have other names. But this, of course, is a driving factor when it comes to production. And we are an institute of production technology at the end. And why is textiles such a very good example? Well, I must say textile was and is always the forerunner in automation and also in digitalization in production. The first punch hole card, was developed to run a textile machine, the so-called Jacquard machine. By the way, it was invented just 200 kilometers from Aachen. Also the mechanization, mechanical-wise, the textile industry was very strong. Also in the electronical and digital automation, the textile industry was also the forerunner in the 80s. Many people mix up the third revolution with the fourth industrial revolution, because the third is just making the machines running automated. The fourth revolution is to interconnect not only the machines with the products with the companies with the consumer. I come to that later. Due to the history, we take also an important role in that respect. When we talk about Industry 4.0, I always say this is not enough. And also in Korea, smart factory is not enough, because this is just making your factory better is not the real McCoy. You have to reinvent your business. And again, I see 4 dimensions. This is a data integration in production, of course, but it's not only that. If you stop there, then you're lost in the future, definitely. You have to think about, how can my products be more digital? How can be my processes more digital and flexible? And last but not least, and this brings us also back to the topic of educating people, because this does not stop at the end of the university, it does not stop at the end of the vocational training. This leads us to what we call Arbeit für Null, which means in English work for zero. And I give you some examples of our previous research on that. Data integration. This is a very, you don't know the machine, it's a weaving machine, but in the past 20 years, especially our institute, but also the companies have very much worked upon that this machine is fully automated. Today, one weaver is operating at least 100 weaving looms. But this is not enough. There is more measurement involved. Up to now, in many cases, not the end product is measured at the production step, but some parameters. And of course, through the price decrease in image processing, you can today also measure the quality of your product on every stage, not on every stage, but on decisive stage. This, of course, creates big data. Then, of course, you have to handle the data between the steps, from spinning to weaving, from weaving to finishing, and you have to also code the product, not the end product, but you have many intermediate products. And this also has to keep into mind. Again, this gives another dimension of complexity to the data. But last but not least, again, a critical remark, if you stop with Industry 4.0 or Smart Factory at the border of your company, then you're lost. It's much more the integration between the companies along the value chain, but also to include the customer or the end customer. And this is a great challenge also for education. There are, of course, advantages for that. Cost reduction, you save energy and materials. You can realize a growth rate. But the main thing is the next generation of digitalization has to be done because you have to have also to meet the wishes of the younger generation. There are challenges. Along the value chain, typically every industry, not only the textile industry, is fragmented. There's a question between small and big company, who is the owner of the property along the value chain. And of course, in the most cases, the value chains are not national anymore, but global. And of course, in this value chain, you have a large variety of different philosophies, understanding. A chemical company which makes the fiber is totally different from the mindset than a weaving company, than a finishing company, apparel production, or even sales and distribution. And, of course, in many of our mature economies, you have a skill shortage. The other thing, products become more digital. And this, again, brings into challenges. You have to bring in different production technologies. You will have different products and applications. The situation in the field of smart textiles, like with many digital products, is there was a hype 10 years ago, created by a lot of demonstrators. We are now in the valley of tears because the consumer has realized, I cannot buy it. And the reason is there is no production technology available, and there are no business cases, the business cases have to develop. This is the objective of our joint research lab in Korea, the Smart Textronics Center. It has a certain history, political history, but also very much supported by the active partners. And we have opened it last month in Korea. And the target is to develop products, but this is not enough. It's also to develop the production technology and also the business models and use cases for using these new products. And of course, you have also digital processes like this digital printing or 3D printing, 4D printing or whatever. And this again means you have to work very interdisciplinary. In this team, I could name you, there is a mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, there's a material expert, there's an expert for economics, and of course a lot of students are also involved. So interdisciplinary cooperation is the key. By this cooperation between Korea and Germany, actually we have the largest research institute in that field worldwide. There are already results. This, for example, is a personal airbag, an airbag which can a worker wear, and when he falls out of a building, his spinal cord is protected because this is typically most reason for severe casualties. And this is done by cooperation between a German company and a Korean company, between a Korean institute and us. So this, of course, needs cultural understanding, cooperation, and also the skills for doing so. Processes. Prominent example for digital processes is the so-called Speed Factory, together with Adidas. You see here how it worked. It's located in Bavaria, and the main clue is the consumer can create his personal shoe with the iPhone, push the send button, and then get the shoe within 2 days. And this is only possible when you integrate the process and then put it to a place where you can fulfill the logistical requirement. And every shoe is different. Yeah? Left and right are the same pattern, but of course different. And then the next shoe is already for this different customer. But Adidas was this development not too much. They say, can we also integrate the production into a store? And this are pictures of the so-called store factory in Berlin. You dance your pattern, you get measured. The consumer is involved in creating the design, and then he pushes the buy button again, and now the production is running, and within 2 hours he gets his personal pullover. He can either watch it, drinking a cup of cappuccino, or he can go to the next stop and buy some other underwear or shoes for that. And this is the utmost stage how you can involve your customer into the production of your products. This, of course, is a challenge. You have to provide solutions which can be operated by everybody, which are reliable, which are multidisciplinary, but at the end of the day, the message is you still need people to operate the machines, to run the processes, to assist the consumer, and so on and so on. But they are different. It starts actually in school. The modern children expect also school education to be digital. Then, of course, when they enter industry, the digital natives and the experts over 50 or 60 meet, and they need different things. The one is looking for digital assistant, the other one has the experience. And how can you bring this together? We have a large project on that, and this is one result. And this is a kind of augmented reality, like Google Glasses you are wearing, and depending on the skill level of the operator, he gets more or less information, and also according to the function he has. Is he for maintenance? Is he for operating? Is he the engineer who wants to develop a new product? He gets different information. There are a lot of chances, but the main thing is you have to try. There is no cooking recipe for Industry 4.0, and therefore, by cooperation with McKinsey & Company, we set up the first model factory for Industry 4.0 called the Digital Capability Center. This is a full line of process, starting with bobbins, ends with a smart wristband. I show it to you. This wristband is not only the product, it can be individualized produced, so the pattern is different, the function of the chip is different, you can program it with an app again, and then you can produce it. But it's also part of the production, so with this ID, the operator again identifies himself to the machine and gets different data, different services, and so on, different accesses. This was only possible between the cooperation, not only McKinsey and us, and 10 other small and medium-sized companies. And the good things, maybe can answer later some question about it, we put this into operation in less than 3 months. Not only the machine, also the full connection of the machines. And it's, of course, also a test bench for new technology. Here is a data glove to make an easier teaching of the robots. It's actually, by the cooperation, it's the largest network of learning factories worldwide. So there are 4 other capability centers all over the world. The question is now, what does it mean for education? I only refer, there are very good publications on Work 4.0 from Architect published. There is an international benchmark which also reflects the cultural background, because it is very important when you talk about digitalization that you not only talk about bits and bytes, but also what is society needing, how is it using this new technology, and so on. So this is very interesting to have this international benchmark. There are of course, German guidelines to have a qualification profile to see where are you, what is needed for different kind of positions. There is also a large study, what is the influence on Industry 4.0 on the work life, and the basic line is that you need more agility, you need much more lifelong learning, and also the traditional union against entrepreneur thing, the role of the social partners has to change. Actually, it must be said, the study Workforce Zero was jointly made by academia, industry, and unions. And these are some outlines. I think these are quite obvious. Long-term perspective, long life learning, development, also adult education. You cannot stop at the university border. And of course, a collaboration, because if you want to make it right, there has to be collaboration from raw materials into even every shopping mall assistant. And of course, what makes it very challenging is there are not only big players. Especially you find a lot of SMEs in these value chains, and they also have to be integrated. Yeah, and how to contribute? One thing is to create places where you can teach people, either in university or after university degree, like, for example, this smart textronics centers, like this model factory. These are very important roles to sustain this education. You have to talk and discuss. It's a very top point to bring you further. And also, you have to work internationally. And a very important thing is that all these things, this is my truest belief, should not take away the traditional methods you teach. The content should be the same. The method how you teach should be changed. And though involving the student, using different kinds of measures. So, for example, you said, is there a competition between? No, between MOOC and me is no competition. It's just a further element which has to be used. And it even gives me more freedom for a real interaction with the student, because a MOOC can only teach basic understanding. Political-wise, we have in North Rhine-Westphalia the first digital minister, this guy. On federal level, we had elections last month, and I hope that maybe at the turn of the year we also have a digital minister, because my belief is that digitalization is so important for society that somebody in the government should be responsible for that. Cooperation, we also have a cooperation between Arcatech, the German Academy of Technology Science, and the National Academy of Engineering Science in Korea. Brings me back to the bottom line of my talk, all about cooperation. Especially digitalization cannot be done by one discipline alone. Thank you very much.